We spend our entire lives chasing happiness, as if it's just one achievement away. The promotion, the perfect partner, the next purchase, the next escape. And every time we reach one of these milestones, we feel a brief spark, only to watch it fade almost immediately. The hunger returns, the cycle resets. Deep down, you already know this pattern, yet you keep running, hoping this time will be different. It never is. And that isn't a personal failure. According to one of history's bleakest thinkers, it is the structure of existence itself. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, forced himself to ask a question we spend our lives avoiding. What if the very act of chasing happiness guarantees our suffering? His worldview sounds dark, almost unbearable. But hidden inside that darkness is a surprisingly practical way out. He does not tell us to abandon happiness. He tells us to redefine it. Schopenhauer's insight is simple but uncomfortable. Happiness is not achieved by piling up pleasures. It comes from reducing unnecessary pain. When we stop worshiping the chase itself, life becomes less frantic, less disappointing, and occasionally, even joyful. Before he died, he left behind an unfinished manuscript, The Art of Being Happy, offering 50 rules for easing the burden of being alive. What you are about to hear is not motivational fluff. It is a philosophy built for people tired of running. If Schopenhauer is right, the cure for suffering isn't to add more to your life, but to subtract what keeps you restless. Let's explore what that means for you. Schopenhauer is often called philosophy's greatest pessimist, the thinker who stared into existence and refused to blink. He earned that reputation. You will not find him telling you to visualize success or believe the universe has a plan for you. His writing cuts straight through the comforting stories we tell ourselves. He refuses to soften the blow. But that darkness is not despair for its own sake. It is a diagnosis. Schopenhauer studied suffering because you cannot escape a trap you refuse to see. Naming the disease is the first step toward its cure. In the studies in Pessimism, he makes a claim most people instinctively reject. Every state of welfare, every feeling of satisfaction, is negative in its character. It consists in freedom from pain, which is the positive element of existence. The happiness of any given life is to be measured not by its pleasures, but by the extent to which it has been free from suffering. He is saying something uncomfortable. What we call happiness is not a condition we possess. It is simply the absence of pain. Pain is real, tangible, measurable. Happiness is the name we give to those rare moments when pain loosens its grip. Look at your own experience. When you feel content, you barely notice it. It registers as neutrality. But when something hurts, physically, emotionally, existentially, it demands attention. Pain dominates the stage. Happiness only appears in hindsight, as recognition that nothing was hurting for a while. This flips our usual measuring stick upside down. We count pleasures, we count achievements, we count moments of joy. Schopenhauer says that is a mistake. A good life isn't defined by how much pleasure you stacked up, but by how much suffering you avoided. The less pain you endure, the better your life has been. Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by Buddhism and by Hindu texts like the Upanishads. The Buddha taught that life is suffering, that craving fuels suffering, and that release comes through letting go. Schopenhauer reached the same conclusion, but expressed it through Western philosophy. Both views converge. Pain is the default. Chasing pleasure intensifies the cycle. The path out is subtraction, not accumulation. So when Schopenhauer insists that pain is the fundamental reality, he isn't trying to ruin your mood. He is trying to wake you up. Because once you see happiness as a brief silence between pains, you stop obsessing over how to feel good and start asking a more powerful question. How much unnecessary suffering can I remove? That shift changes everything. It turns philosophy into practical therapy, and it prepares us for Schopenhauer's next move, learning how to reduce pain rather than endlessly hunting for fleeting highs. Schopenhauer's next move is unsettling but crucial. If pain is the groundwork of existence, then where does that suffering actually occur? His answer cuts deeper than psychology. It reaches into how we experience reality itself. Schopenhauer argues that we never encounter the world as it truly is. What we experience are representations, mental constructions built by our minds. There is no object without a subject. Everything you see, touch, or react to is filtered, shaped, and interpreted before it ever reaches consciousness. The world we suffer in is not the world out there, but the one our minds present to us. This idea did not appear from thin air. It was heavily inspired by Immanuel Kant, who argued that we can never grasp the thing in itself, only its appearance as processed through perception. Schopenhauer takes this seriously. If our pain and longing are responses to a world we never access directly, then perhaps the root of suffering is not the world, but our interpretation of it. This is confusing at first because it challenges common sense. We like to believe reality is fixed and solid, that events and objects force feelings upon us. But Schopenhauer says the opposite. What affects us is not the thing itself, but the meaning we attach to it. And this is where the philosophy becomes liberating rather than paralyzing. If perception is constructed, it can be reconstructed. If suffering is mediated by the mind, then the mind has room to loosen its grip. Liberation starts not by changing the external world, but by changing how we apprehend it. Think about how often two people live through the same situation, yet experience it entirely differently. One collapses under it, the other endures. The difference lies in perception, not circumstance. Schopenhauer's point is sharp. You are not tormented by the world, you are tormented by the way you grasp it. To weaken the will's control, you must weaken its interpretations. You must learn to see differently. But how do you do that? How do you adjust perception when it feels automatic and involuntary? That question opens the door to Schopenhauer's practical cure, where he shifts from metaphysics to method, where philosophy becomes a tool rather than an idea. If perception shapes suffering, Schopenhauer asks a radical question. What if we simply stop feeding the will altogether? His most extreme answer is asceticism, the systematic restraint of desire. By refusing to chase pleasure, by starving the impulses that drive us, the will weakens. The idea is simple. If craving sustains suffering, then denying craving might dissolve it. This is the path of turning away from the world rather than wrestling with it. The ascetic renounces pleasure, ambition, status, and sensuality. They do not fight the will, they step out of its game entirely. Schopenhauer sees in this the same logic that underlies Buddhism. Enlightenment through the extinction of craving. The ascetic doesn't merely reduce pain, they aim to uproot it at its source. But here Schopenhauer is brutally honest. Almost no one is capable of this. Complete renunciation is not a lifestyle. It is a mutation of temperament. Only a small fraction of people ever reaches the kind of self-mastery required to silence the will completely. To them, suffering truly ends. For the rest of us, this route may be admirable, but it is not realistic. So, yes, the escape exists. Total freedom from pain is theoretically achievable. But Schopenhauer knows most of humanity will never walk that path. Instead, he shifts to a more attainable goal. Don't eliminate suffering, reduce it. Make life less burdensome, less chaotic, and occasionally even enjoyable. This is where his philosophy becomes useful. If asceticism is the summit few can reach, then the rest of us need footholds, practices that weaken the will without abandoning life. That is where Schopenhauer's 50 rules come in. They don't promise enlightenment. They promise something much more valuable for ordinary people: relief. If enlightenment through renunciation is beyond reach for almost everyone, then what does Schopenhauer offer the rest of us? This is where his 50 rules step in. They are not written for monks or mystics. They are written for ordinary people who still live in the world, still feel desire, and still struggle under the weight of the will. Schopenhauer warns us away from two tempting but misguided paths. First, he rejects the Stoic ideal of total detachment. He thinks the will to live is simply too strong in most people. Asking the average person to treat pleasure and pain with complete indifference is unrealistic. Second, he rejects Machiavellianism, the pursuit of happiness at the expense of others. A life built on manipulation and dominance may succeed externally, but it corrupts the inner life and deepens suffering. So he searches for a middle way. He borrows the Stoic term Eudaimonia, but reshapes its meaning. For the Greeks, it referred to flourishing through virtue and alignment with nature. Schopenhauer turns it into something more sober. A good life, he says, is one that is clearly preferable to not existing. It is not blissful. It is simply bearable enough to choose over nothingness. This is his version of happiness for the ordinary person. Not the elimination of pain, but its reduction. Not ecstatic highs, but fewer lows. A life that, when examined honestly, feels worth continuing. It sounds modest, maybe even disappointing, but it is brutally realistic. Most people will never transcend desire. Most will never reach enlightenment. Schopenhauer's promise is different. You don't need to. You only need to learn how to suffer less. And that is exactly what his 50 rules attempt to teach. They form a map not to perfection, but to relief. A life worth living not because it is euphoric, but because it is tolerable, grounded, and occasionally even joyful. So, how do we actually apply this philosophy? Schopenhauer begins with something most people never question: our entitlement to happiness. He argues that the surest path to a tolerable life is not to chase delight, but to lower our expectations of it. The goal is simple: stop assuming the world owes you joy and focus instead on reducing unnecessary pain. It may not sound poetic, but it is practical, and practicality is exactly what suffering demands. Schopenhauer noticed that young people are the most intoxicated by the myth of positive happiness, the idea that life is designed for our enjoyment. In his time, it was novels and poetry that fed this illusion. Today it is films, Instagram feeds, motivational culture, and the endless pressure to live your best life. The narrative is seductive, but it is false. And when you chase something unreal, the only possible outcome is disappointment. According to Schopenhauer, what we call positive happiness is a fiction. The real thing, the only thing we actually feel, is the absence of pain. If you accept that, then the task becomes clear. Stop pursuing fantasies and start managing reality. Happiness is not something you achieve. It is what emerges when suffering is quiet enough to let you breathe. This is why he gives one of his most striking lines: the safest way of not being very miserable is not to expect to be very happy. With age, people learn this instinctively. Experience has beaten them enough times to stop believing life will reward them if they just try hard enough. Instead of chasing happiness the way they did in youth, they focus on minimizing the damage. They avoid needless stress. They stop demanding perfection. They give up illusions that once tormented them. This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy begins. Not in grand idealism, but in a grounded shift of expectations. Let go of what you think life should give you. Only then do you have a chance at something like peace. Schopenhauer argued that it is better to live a life free from major suffering than one filled with the greatest joys. On the surface, that sounds almost depressing, yet reality keeps proving him right. Just look at the people who seem to have everything. Celebrities eat the finest food, sleep in mansions, swim in infinity pools, and receive endless admiration. Yet many of them are among the most troubled and hollow. Their access to maximum pleasure doesn't protect them. It often breaks them. Addiction, depression, public breakdowns, and even suicide become common outcomes for people who supposedly won life. The insanity does not stop there. Culture worships these lives as ideals. You are taught that if you do not reach these heights, you failed. And here is the twisted punchline: people become miserable because they failed to attain a lifestyle that makes people miserable. That irony is brutal, but it exposes the illusion at the heart of our thinking. Schopenhauer's response is simple. The wise person does not chase these shiny traps. They do not strive to embody an existence that produces suffering. Their aim is to avoid unnecessary pain. If pleasure escapes them, nothing is lost, because pleasure itself is unreliable. It is smoke. So, the better question is this: how do we structure our lives to reduce pain rather than chase illusions that ultimately hurt us? If Schopenhauer is right that life is mostly suffering, then the rational move is to learn how to suffer less. He starts with something most people avoid: knowing yourself. Pain often comes from believing we are something we are not. When we hold a fantasy version of ourselves, reality eventually humiliates us. This is why he insisted that self-knowledge is essential. Study your strengths and weaknesses. Use the abilities that come naturally to you, instead of trying to force yourself into roles you are not suited for. When you live in alignment with what you are good at, you avoid much of the sting that comes from constant failure. The second adjustment is internal rather than external. Schopenhauer makes a blunt claim: what we are matters more than what we have. In other words, your inner state beats your outer possessions. It makes sense when you think about it. Health and cheerfulness will improve your life more than money or status ever could. As he put it, the healthy bum is happier than a sick king. So rather than chasing labels or approval, focus on your state of mind and body. Choose habits that protect your health. Welcome cheerfulness because it shapes how you experience each moment. This isn't a call to become a monk. It is a call to treat people, objects, and status with a kind of healthy indifference. Finally, Schopenhauer borrows from ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus to offer a practical strategy. Aim for needs that are simple, easy to satisfy, and stable. Eating, drinking, rest, small comforts. These can be fulfilled without huge costs. What should you avoid? The pursuit of fame, extreme wealth, or any pleasure that demands suffering to obtain or maintain. These goals are rarely achievable, never secure, and always extract pain along the way. If the aim is to reduce suffering, then pick the pleasures that do not punish you for pursuing them. In the end, Schopenhauer doesn't point us towards sainthood or indulgence. He points us toward balance. His version of the good life is neither chasing the shimmering fantasy of positive happiness, nor torturing ourselves through extreme self-denial. The wise approach sits between these two. Select the pleasures that do not demand suffering to attain or defend, and refuse the ones that turn into traps the moment you reach for them. This mindset forces a priority shift. Your first responsibility is your inner state. Mental and physical health outrank everything else. When you feel grounded on the inside, the outside world, no matter how harsh, becomes tolerable. That is the practical wisdom Schopenhauer offers. We may never reach perfect happiness, but we can make life bearable, even enjoyable, by reducing avoidable suffering, respecting our limits, and choosing stability over illusion. That is not glamorous, but it works.